Get started, John?
Yeah, thank you, David. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to BOMA San Francisco's Government Affairs Forum. My name is John Bryant and I am the CEO and Executive Director of BOMA San Francisco. And I'm really excited to be a part of this program today, as advocacy is at the heart of BOMA San Francisco's mission and our activities. The association is working aggressively to promote the interests of our members by monitoring legislative proposals and advocating for positions that enhance and protect the value of commercial real estate and for the members who work in the industry. Now, more than anything, our government affairs strategy is focused on being practical above all else. Here at BOMA, and with the help of our government affairs and other policy committees, we're committed to putting aside politics, and we're really trying to become honest brokers that collaborate with government to find practical solutions whenever possible. This approach will be key as we face challenges of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, a potential economic recession, and profound changes on how and where employees work. You're going to hear from David Harrison, our Manager of Government Affairs, on how we're tackling some of these issues, both big and small. And you're also going to hear some of what we've accomplished already this year with the leadership of Anna Duffy, the chair of our Government Affairs and Policy Advocacy Committee, who's also with us today. So we want today to be informative, but we also want today's session to be conversational. So please, if you have any questions, particularly questions around clarification, feel free to ask them during the presentation, but afterwards, we're definitely going to make sure there's time for discussion with both David, Anna, and myself. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Harrison, our Government Affairs Manager, to take it away and to give our presentation. David?
Thanks, John. Really appreciate the intro. And before I get started, I just want to echo exactly what John said. I have a lot of thank yous. Starting, we're really lucky as an association to have John Bryant leading us. The experience that he brings from BOMA International in federal advocacy and leading us through a really challenging time has been really, really helpful. I also want to thank Anna Duffy, who's done just a wonderful job leading our Government Affairs Committee and is really, really knowledgeable about so many things, particularly decarbonizing the built environment, which is one of our large priorities. And I also want to thank really quickly Sylvia Price and Megan Kelly, who's our new manager of membership, who's here on her second day, as well as our president, Glenn Good, and so many of you. So thank you all for joining us. And like John said, I really want today to be, I'm going to start it off with some slides, but I want today to be conversational and informal. And so if you have any questions, feel free to stop me as I'm going, and there'll definitely be times for discussion at the end. So with that, I am going to share some slides. We'll go ahead and get started. And the classic Zoom question, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. And before we get started, also, I do want to thank our corporate sponsors for supporting us this year. So we are still in the middle of Q3, almost at the end, and we should have some statistics soon, but this is kind of where we kicked off this last quarter. Obviously, it's been a hard time for commercial real estate. We're seeing a record high vacancy rate, almost 23%. We're seeing a sublease market that has come down from its peak, but is quite large and competing against available space. And we're seeing leasing volumes well below pre-pandemic levels when there was quite a low level of vacancies and high competition for not just Class A space, but all space in San Francisco. The good news, or some of the good news, is you can see that occupancy, while we are still trailing in many major cities, has really ticked up lately, particularly post Labor Day. We're hovering around 40% for the San Francisco metro area. So quick disclaimer that the Kastle numbers take both city and county of San Francisco, as well as some areas directly outside of the city. So this is not particularly the best number for downtown, but this is good news that we're seeing folks come back to the office. And I'm sure many of you, like me, have seen trains busier, more foot traffic, companies starting to talk about moving to a hybrid schedule. So there is some positive movement. And I think, another good indicator of the challenge, but also the understanding of the challenge, is that the Board of Supervisors are really starting to pay attention. We're seeing Catherine Stephanie has made an inquiry about This says the impact of potential Proposition 8, so temporary value reductions, but we're also seeing some concern about permanent property value reductions and what that might do to the city's tax revenue. We are an outsized share of what funds the services that the city is able to provide. Supervisor Asha Safai has already held 2 hearings on the impact of economic vacancies, and there's a third. BOMA's been participating in those. And then also, Glenn Good had Supervisor Raphael Mandelman at his building last week for a discussion. And he was pretty plain in that this is not the time to add taxes to the business community. Supervisor Mandelman also has introduced some inquiry to examining the city's tax, the tax scheme and how we tax our different corporations and commercial real estate. So there's going to be some really interesting discussions, I think, with the board, realizing that the business community and a flourishing commercial real estate market is really important to the success of downtown San Francisco. And we'll definitely keep you appraised of those conversations as they happen. I think another exciting thing is that the business community is mobilizing to find solutions. And I think in the near term, a lot of those solutions are going to be about finding creative ways to activate spaces and get people reconnected with downtown. So this is Belden Alley, which you are all probably familiar with. I think one of the best examples of that. And I'd like to actually give a shout out to, I think Glenn is the only downtown San Francisco Alliance board member right now, but the downtown partnership is doing a really wonderful job in re-envisioning what the future of downtown San Francisco is going to look like. So if you haven't been able to check it out, I'd really recommend taking a look at their public realm action plan. There's some great ideas about how we can change space, and we're really looking forward to working collaboratively with them and all of you in government in terms of making some of these ideas a reality. I think one of the cool examples that's coming from that is Liedensdorf Alley. So if you walk through this alley right now, it's not very exciting, but Robbie Silver and his team have a great proposal here to think about how we can activate spaces like this. And I'm also excited to announce that we've been a part of a group that's trying to use downtown public art to revitalize downtown, and is stepping in and trying to raise public funds and navigate the permitting process for a mural in this alley faster than we could do working with just government grants alone. And so just for a taste, this is a mural called The Love Letter to Oakland. And this is the mural that they're trying to replicate, something like this for Liesendorf Alley. So I think really cool examples of, these are not long-term solutions, but bright people trying to step in and think about how we can fill the gaps and make downtown a more exciting place. And I think if you look at San Francisco's history, we've reinvented ourselves so many times. This is exactly the type of creativity and collaboration and commitment from the business community that we're going to need in the short term to get things moving again, make folks excited about coming down to work, to play, to enjoy, all that downtown has to offer. As that relates to BOMA's government affairs, though, there's obviously some longer term solutions that we're going to have to talk about. That's going to be things from, you already heard me mention our city's tax structure. Certainly zoning changes is something that's being discussed at both the local and state level. Permitting is one of the things that we hear is the hardest for small businesses in San Francisco. I'm sure you've all read stories of hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment, years of waiting for permitting for small businesses to open. That has to get better. And we're also on our side going to need to see faster permit processing so that we can adjust our spaces to new tenant needs, right? The traditional office is not looking like it looked in 2019. You're seeing more open spaces, more flexible spaces. That's going to need to be something that we adjust to and can do so quickly. Housing obviously is another key investment. And then the last two that we've really heard from all of you is public safety is a large concern, and transit. People getting downtown in a way that's clean and safe and reliable is a real key. And so now I'm just going to talk about some of the advocacy that we've been doing on these fronts. So public safety, again, was at the forefront from what we heard from you, particularly when there weren't a lot of folks coming downtown at the beginning of COVID. Hey, we're not feeling safe because there's not a lot of foot traffic. So one of the first things that we were able to do was become a key partner in the San Francisco Welcome Ambassador program. So these folks are around all of the major transit hubs and tourist hubs in San Francisco, and they're working collaboratively with overlapping with other community ambassador programs. Downtown has a great community ambassador program. Union Square, Urban Alchemy is doing a tremendous job. So these are great examples of non-police interventions that we can fund just to create a sense of foot traffic, welcoming, and sort of a see something, say something feeling in and around the downtown. We were also able to advocate for more than $40 million in OEWD's budget, which in part funds these ambassador programs, but also is funding grants to small businesses in downtown to keep them open. That's one of the other things that I think you're all hearing from your tenants is when I come to work, there's not a lot of places to go, or all the businesses downtown are closing. I think it's very vital that there's these investments from government, because we hear again and again about a chicken and egg situation of the businesses want to open, but people have to come to work. People want to come to work, but the businesses have to open. This is going to help keep that ball moving. And then there's been other really important developments in terms of housing and homelessness and trying to change the status quo there. So I'm really proud to say that we were one of the first, if not the first, business group to come out in support of Supervisor Mandelman's A Place for All ordinance. And what that said is we understand that we're a city that's housing first, but we're also going to make investments in temporary shelter so that we can make folks or ask folks to not use public spaces as a shelter of last resort. That should not be what we're accepting. And to be able to work ourselves out of that, we have to have the proper temporary shelter alternatives so that folks aren't relying on the street. So I'm really excited to see where that's going to go. There's going to be a report in the coming months from the Board of Supervisors of what it's going to cost the city to potentially have available shelter for folks on any given night, so that we can start to do some targeted enforcement when there are opportunities to get folks indoors. Another key thing on the public safety front was SFPD staffing. So another narrative has been that due to retirements and morale, there is a tremendous shortage in officers in San Francisco Police Department, and that impacts response times. That impacts the ability to do things like community policing and beat walks. And so it was a real priority for us to be an outspoken advocate for funding for SFPD, to say, yes, you can achieve reforms and you can hire a new class of officers that are well-trained and responsive to community needs all at once. It can't be one or the other. And so I'm really proud of Mayor Breed and the Board of Supervisors. They were able to allocate an additional $50 million in funding for the police department. That's going to lead to, among other things, 220 officers being hired. That's really going to start to help fill some of the gap in the staffing shortages that we're seeing. And they're doing that while being one of the leading departments in the country in terms of reform and making sure that they're also addressing the needs of underprivileged or marginalized communities. So I think that's a really, really great development, and Chief Scott is doing a great job leading SFPD on that front. Another development just last week is that the Board of Supervisors passed the Police Surveillance Technology Ordinance. So while we have this shortage of officers, it's really hard to have the resources to be able to respond to crime in real time. And what that means when you don't have the manpower is you're going to have to rely on technology to be able to fill some of those gaps. This was quite controversial, obviously, given some of the civil rights concerns with surveillance. But I think I'm really proud that the board came to an agreement with the mayor that balances those needs and gives temporary access to private cameras, some of which are run by community benefit districts, some of which might be in the future private cameras from your businesses, giving them temporary access for up to 24 hours when there's a crime, when there's a high crime area, or when there's an incident that is life-threatening for 24 hours. So this is going to be a 15-month trial, but I've already had conversations with some of you about how cameras have helped you solve instances where there's been vandalism or crime around your buildings. So this was another one that we were really proud that we were able to support the mayor on this. And I do think this is going to help ease some of those situations in which you're having behavior that is causing issues with your properties. Another really exciting thing that's happening is the tide is starting to turn on the drug addiction and mental health crisis conversation. So Supervisor Matt Dorsey, who temporarily represents District 6 and is up for re-election, he was appointed by Mayor Breed after Matt Haney won his election to State Assembly. Supervisor Dorsey comes from a background of struggling with addiction himself. And one of the things we constantly hear about San Francisco is, one, there's all these efforts that are not being collaborated or cooperating across the necessary places where you need interlap between the Department of Public Health, the Department of Homelessness, all the different city-owned departments. So this is a report from 21 different departments and 6 commissions about what's going to be needed to collaboratively address the ongoing drug crisis. But then there's some really other critical things. I think the one that's received the most news is the Right to Recovery program. So if there are areas where we are providing more assistance for substance abuse treatment, this was particularly an issue as the bill in Sacramento was being discussed to allow safe consumption sites. The governor did veto that bill. There's some potential that the city might move forward anyway. But this would have increased enforcement outside of those sites. So often what we hear is folks who are in recovery are there's only so many places they can go in the city. And there is often an environment where they are right outside of the very things that they're trying to avoid. So this would add targeted enforcement outside of those zones. There would be changes to how we approach public health, criminal justice, job opportunities for folks trying to get clean. And I think the really, really great thing about this is that this is primarily not funded from the city budget. This is going to be funded by the settlement that the city recently reached with opioid manufacturers. So I think that's a really great proposal from Supervisor Dorsey, something that Supervisor Stephanie and Mandelman have already gotten on board with, and something we're really excited about as BOMA San Francisco to continue watching. Transportation, obviously another really key agenda item here for BOMA San Francisco in terms of getting folks downtown. So the first thing that we've been advocating for is we've got to get the system back running to where it was before. That's a tough ask for MTA. At the onset of the pandemic, they let a lot of folks go, not expecting federal relief funding. They were able to get that funding, but it obviously takes a lot of time to get folks trained and process through the bureaucracy so that the system can be running. But I am proud to say that they are ramping up service as they do hiring. And I think that's going to make a difference. Again, we've got to give people those ways to get downtown without sitting in traffic or without having a really, really long commute where they have to make switches or that they get stuck. So that's a really important investment. Again, public safety is a key issue that we hear about, particularly as it relates to transit. So we've supported a lot of funding and programs for BART and Muni ambassadors, as well as policing. And we've also been really clear, as Muni faces a budget deficit, they're going to be pursuing in the coming years ways to fill that deficit and find new revenue. And we've been very clear that you cannot unfairly burden the downtown business interests in doing so. There's been no proposals of that since through 2022, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion. But I think we've really made sure that we're supporting transportation efforts where we can, but we cannot be the sole funders of the system moving forward. And some good news on this front, the 2 large capital projects that Muni is conducting right now are almost finished. The Van Ness Rapid Bus Route is finished. That one was over budget, but is being well received despite the delays as well. So really happy to see that. And you probably have seen that the Central Subway is doing a soft open on November 19th. So it's going to start just on weekends and it's not connected to the T3rd yet. But I do think that this is positive news, primarily because we are really going to be able to push Muni to get back to the basics after finishing these capital projects. Efficiency is going to be key rather than continuing to expand the system. And so I think that's going to make a real difference for some of our tenants who are having a tough time getting downtown. And looking forward on the transportation front, we also have been able to have a discussion with the SFCTA about congestion pricing. They were really trying to push through the study last year and the year before, while we were seeing obviously a complete change in traffic patterns. without any discussions about what the impact would be on businesses within the zone. And so through a coalition of various business interests, we were able to get this study delayed through 2023. It's going to more accurately reflect traffic patterns, and we're going to continue to be able to advocate for, we do not believe that congestion pricing is the way to move forward. But if you were to explore this program, here are all of the things that you would need to consider before you do. So I'm really excited that we're going to have a better study moving forward that I think is going to more accurately represent the impacts of congestion pricing. So kind of the bread and butter of what we've been working on this year is decarbonizing the built environment and energy and environment. And I already gave Anna the shout out, but really I can't speak enough to how lucky we are to have her leading the way on this and helping us. This is going to be the issue for all of your buildings for the next 10 years. And it's critical that everybody start thinking about this now. We're doing a lot of work on it. So some key dates: the Climate Action Plan, which is the city's goals for net zero, have been approved last year. So we don't actually have the mechanisms for how we're going to get there in terms of legislation, but we have the goals. So all new construction now has to be 100% electrified. You're going to see at the end of this year, our largest commercial buildings are going to have to start purchasing 100% renewable electricity. And in the next couple of years, you're going to see policies from the city about when you're going to have to start replacing your natural gas systems. And by 2035, there's the expectation that your systems be completely electric. So, those goals are great. They're lofty, but there's some real challenges when it comes to capital funding, when it comes to the state of the commercial real estate market, and when it comes to technical challenges that commercial buildings face as it relates to electrification. So here are some of the guiding principles that we've given the Department of Environment in a lot of the discussions that we've had. We've started to have some discussions with supervisors too, to make sure that they really understand we are on board with getting to net zero, but you have to do it in a way that works for our industry, and you have to partner with us in a way that's workable, or else there's going to be real challenges to getting to net zero. So as you can see, capital planning is going to be key. Cost sharing with tenants is going to be key. Making sure that there's help for utilities that are already rising. And again, are there creative ways that the city can incentivize electrification rather than just making a mandate? So how can they help us get there is, I think, going to be the real key. Another one that we're working on right now, as I just mentioned, is that by the end of this year, the largest buildings in San Francisco are going to have to start purchasing 100% renewable energy. We are working really tirelessly on regulatory guidance for that. And so we've already been able to get some real wins. One of the things that the Department of Environment was trying to legislate through the regulations was that you would be responsible for fines and for chasing down tenants on a sub-meter who were non-compliant. And we said that's completely unworkable for our industry. So we were able to get that changed. And there's been an ongoing discussions about the wait list. So right now, PG&E's wait list doesn't open until 2026. There's been discussions about what will qualify. And what we've been able to do is, if there's programs that you might be forced into, we've been able to get price caps so that if you're forced to switch, you at least will have price protections from switching from PG&E to Super Green or the Hetch Hetchy SFPC program. Those are not finalized, by the way, but in the coming weeks, this is going to be finalized. So definitely look for updates from us on this one next month. All right, and now the fun stuff. So the other thing that's going on, right, is that we've got the November elections coming up. There's 5 even supervisorial district elections, a ton of ballot measures across the city, another special election for district attorney, and another special election for Board of Education members. So Ellen was telling me some of you are getting your ballots. Definitely start doing your homework. There's a lot to vote on this year, and it's going to be quite important. So here's the current makeup of the Board of Supervisors. I've put it into 2 columns. I've never loved these monikers for San Francisco, but the quote unquote moderates on the left and the quote unquote progressives on the right. You'll see two members who sort of fluctuate. Some more, I think you could argue, fluctuate, but really Myrna Melgar out of District 7 and Aaron Peskin out of District 3 sort of float back and forth. But as you can see how the math adds up, when you add Gordon Marr to the progressive category too, is that there's a quote unquote progressive majority in the Board of Supervisors that makes it really hard to advocate for business interests. The exciting thing is that there's two winnable elections in Districts 4 and District 6. So in District 4, Joel Engardio is challenging Gordon Marr, incumbent in the Outer Sunset District. And Matt Dorsey, who was appointed by Mayor Breed, has a really tight race with Honey Mahogany, who was Matt Haney's chief of staff in District 6 and the former chair of the Democratic Central Committee. So those are two races that we're going to be watching very heavily, and I'll give you some insight into those now. One of the big things that happened this year was redistricting, and we saw districts change, and that's going to play a huge factor in these two races. So on the left, you see District 4, typically where District 4 ended at Sloat Boulevard. You can see it absorbed Lakeside and that area near Lowell High School south of Sloat Boulevard. That's important because that's where the challenger Joel Engardio lives and won over 60% of the vote in his last election. So this is a real boost to Engardio. It means that the district's changed. And there's also a lot of resentment against Gordon Marr as it relates to the Board of Education recall and the district attorney recall, both of which he opposed, but were quite heavily supported in District 4. So I think you're going to see a really tight race there. District 6 on the right-hand side has changed a lot. Formerly, it encompassed the Tenderloin. The Tenderloin has been moved out of District 6 and into District 5, where Supervisor Dean Preston will be in charge. But District 6, as you can see, has also been the district that's grown the most population-wise in the last 10 years relative to the census. So it had to absorb different neighborhoods. And what that meant is this whole area near Oracle Park and near the basketball stadium in Dogpatch and Mission Bay has now been absorbed into District 6. And that's a real change in the demographics of the district. So that is going to also lead to a really tight and interesting race in District 6, where Matt Dorsey, who's got a fundraising lead and who has done a really great job in terms of being on point with his messaging, I think you're going to see a really tight race there too, with Matt Dorsey with a real chance. So the head-to-head on the candidates here, the incumbent Gordon Marr, there hasn't been an incumbent win a race in District 4 since 2000. There hasn't been an incumbent lose a race for supervisor, an elected incumbent lose a race for supervisor since 2000. That was when the city moved to district elections rather than at-large citywide elections. So that's something that's going on for Gordon Marr. You will also see that the Outer Sunset in District 4 is a heavily API community, and there is sort of a sentiment in San Francisco political thought that it's going to be really hard for somebody who's not a member of the API community to win a race there. So that's another advantage to Supervisor Marr. But the two things that will be really interesting to see, again, he was on the quote unquote wrong side on these recall elections. That could come back to bite him. And he's not really known for being aggressive in his legislating. There's, I think, a lot of unknown about him within the community, and that could be a positive or a negative. On the other side, you've got Joel Engardio, who was really outspoken about crime, safety, and the Board of Education recalls. He's built a huge following on those fronts. He's really positioned himself as a political moderate who's willing to be practical and think about how we move the city forward. The one downside for Joel is this is the 4th time he's running for supervisor. So the clock is ticking in terms of viability here. And I think this is going to be where the rubber hits the road for him. So a really interesting race to watch, and one BOMA is involved in. On the east side in District 6, you've got Honey Mahogany. Honey Mahogany has some advantages. She would be a historic candidate. She was the first Black and trans chair of the Democratic County Central Committee. She was inheriting Supervisor Matt Haney's, now Assemblymember Matt Haney's field team that just trounced David Campos in the assembly races. But the district has changed. So the Tenderloin and Transcultural districts are no longer in District 6. It looks different, and it'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out electorally. With Matt Dorsey, he's also has a very, very compelling story as an openly gay man living with HIV who's recovered from addiction issues. He's got the support of Mayor Breed and her political establishment, as well as the business community. And he's also close ties. He formerly was a spokesperson for SFPD, which I think plays very well in a time where folks are keyed in on the issue of public safety, but also that can be controversial as well for voters. So it'll be really interesting to see how this race shakes out as well. And then you've got district attorney, another really key race. There's 3 candidates here. The appointed incumbent, Brooke Jenkins, who has a significant lead in polling. She was, as you may know, a former prosecutor who left DA Chesa Boudin's office amid some differences in opinion and how he was running things. She was a spokesperson for the Recall Chesa campaign and then was appointed by the mayor. And she's heavily involved with the folks that were instrumental in getting Chesa Boudin removed. She's quite tied into different communities in San Francisco, and I think is a heavy favorite for this race. You've got John Hamasaki, who has said, I'm not another Chesa Boudin, but there's a lot of out there things being said by this man. Statements about defunding the DA's office, allowing youth to carry guns. He was a former police commissioner and now serves as a civil rights and defense attorney. So I think you're going to see there's definitely a floor in terms of some of the far left votes he's going to be able to pull in San Francisco. But the question is he going to be able to, particularly in a ranked choice environment, appeal to enough San Franciscans? And then you've got Joe Alioto, who's the grandson of the former mayor, Joe Alioto. He's also a former police commissioner and trial attorney. I think there was a banking on the Alioto name here, but the Aliotos politically have not been as relevant as they were in the past. His mother, Angela Alioto, ran for mayor in 2018 and was unable to qualify for public financing. So I don't see a lot of traction here, and I think the question is, where are those votes going to go in ranked choice? And probably to Brooke Jenkins. And then there's a ton of ballot measures, and I apologize, these are not in alphabetical order, but definitely take note of these as you're continuing to fill out your ballots. So first and foremost, Measure L is a continuation of the existing sales tax to fund transportation projects in San Francisco. This one is important because it is a tax measure proposed by the government, so it's going to require 2/3 to pass. As you saw in the primary elections, Measure A, which was the bond to support Muni, did not receive 2/3 to pass. So there's going to be some extra work required to be able to pass this one. And it's really critical because this is a funding source that Muni is relying on, and they need a new expenditure plan for these funds. So really critical that this gets passed, and we will see if they're able to get that 2/3 threshold. It's really hard. Another interesting one is Asha Safai has come out with a homelessness oversight commission proposal. So this would create a new homelessness oversight commission that is majority appointed by the mayor, but 3 of which are appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Interestingly enough, Mayor Breed has come out in opposition to this, saying that it's going to lead to more bureaucracy and more confusion about who is responsible for progress on the issue of homelessness. So this is one we're watching closely, and I think it'll be really interesting to see. I think there's certainly an appetite from San Franciscans for more accountability as it comes to homelessness oversight, particularly in the expenditures of Proposition C funds from 2018. The question is this going to lead to a positive policy outcome? Measure H is an important one to know. This is pushed by Supervisor Dean Preston. This would move the citywide elections in 2023 to 2024. You can talk about why they're doing this. Some folks think it's really a good faith effort to increase voter turnout, which I think it is. I think there's also a feeling among Supervisor Preston's faction on the Board of Supervisors that they will do better in citywide elections if they're aligned with a presidential election year where there's higher turnout. This one is polling really high at 80+%. So I do expect that you're going to see an extra year on the terms for the folks that would be elected next year. So Mayor Breed probably wouldn't be up for re-election until 2024. Whoever wins the district attorney race won't be up until 2024 in these citywide elections. And now the other two that we're watching really, really closely, Measure O is the additional parcel tax for City College. So this one is very interesting. We were watching this with our Government Affairs and Policy Advisory Committee because we were torn. This is certainly a tax directly on our buildings, and we wanted to be cognizant of that in our priorities as an industry, while also understanding that we want to make investments in our public education and the pipeline that helps us hire folks from San Francisco into our industry. So we initially were thinking pretty neutrally on this. However, there's been some developments. There's a BLA analysis that said that this tax would go over double its allotment in terms of administrative costs, meaning that it's going to cost a lot more to raise this revenue in terms of collecting it than it is actually going to lead to in revenue for City College. And there's already some existing issues with City College. Obviously, they've gone through 9 chancellors in the last 10 years. There's no plan for how these funds would be expended. And you've seen Mayor Breed and Supervisor Aaron Peskin come out in opposition to this measure. And so BOMA San Francisco has done the same. And then Measure M is a tax on residential units, vacant residential units in the city. That one is, while as controversial, polling a lot better for Dean Preston. So this would, the issue really at the heart of this is, how do you qualify a unit as vacant? The initial report that this tax was based off of was counting units that were under renovation, where someone had passed away. So there's a lot of complicated issues here, but I do expect, unless the polling changes a little bit, this one, Measure M, to pass, whereas Measure O is actually polling quite unfavorably. Almost 2/3 are opposed to Measure O before title and summary. And then, again, I just want to say we're really well positioned because of people like you who are here today, who participate in our committees. And again, our GAPAC committee has done a wonderful job in terms of positioning us to bring forward practical ideas and knowledge to government partners. And our PAC is committed over $100,000 this November to making sure that we get candidates and ballot measures that represent our industry. So I'm really excited to see how this all plays out. And again, because of all of you, we're well positioned here. And I know I'm going long here, so let me just quickly recap what we were able to accomplish so far this year. We're leading on decarbonization. We were able to really lay the framework for climate action plan. We got significant amendments to 100% renewables regulations. And we were also able to lead policymakers away from a carbon tax that they were proposing for November. We've gotten historic investments in public safety, in SFPD hiring, ambassador programs, urging new approaches towards mental health, surveillance technology. We're really playing a key role in thinking about the future of downtown, securing funding to study that, trying to partner with folks to continue to have creative ways to activate spaces in the near term and the short term. And last but not least, I want to make sure everybody knows, check out our advocacy resources page. We're working really hard so that you don't have to attend things like this to get the information, but that it's there on our website, so that there's briefing materials, there's great recordings of webinars that discusses everything from EV charging mandates, facade ordinances, how to think about decarbonization for your buildings. And again, our advocacy is really driven by all of you. And so I want to use that to open it up to questions, discussion, thoughts, however I can be helpful, and the other folks on this call to helping you talk about the issues facing your buildings and the long-term future of San Francisco.
Great, thank you, David. Incredible presentation and a ton of information, and all of it incredibly timely. So we appreciate all of your efforts, David, Anna, Jeff Corvey, our government affairs leaders. We really appreciate your guys' involvement. None of this would have happened without the volunteer leadership that we have, which is incredibly powerful. So thank you to everybody. Now we do have some time for some questions and answers. If anybody has any, feel free to put them in to the chat box, or if you'd like to go on camera and raise your hand, we can take them that way as well. Although, David, you covered just about everything you could cover, so I don't imagine there's going to be a ton of questions, but we do want to make sure that we give you the opportunity.
So you're going to be sending us a update on how to vote, right? On BOMA's positions?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I follow your lead.
Thanks, Ellen. Any other questions?
No question, but I can add a comment really quick. Thank you, David, for a great presentation summarizing literally everything we talk about in our meetings. And thank you, both David and John, for being our fearless leaders on government affairs. If anyone is interested in joining our government affairs committee, please feel free to join. We have our committee meetings on the first Wednesday of every month. We were on a little recess because the Board of Supervisors were as well in August or September. But we have a meeting next week. We cover topics, all of the topics that David just mentioned, and we have some really instrumental members on the committee, and we chat through kind of what should BOMA's position be on some of these tax measures or special elections or legislation coming down the pipeline, or how can we partner with different associations on things like the Climate Action Plan and really leverage all of our resources. So it's super fun. I find it incredibly interesting. I've never been more informed about the happenings of San Francisco, and there are many. So please consider joining. We're always welcoming new members, and we can always use different perspective and new expertise at the table. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. Appreciate that. There was a question in the chat room. It says, can we have a copy of the slides for closer review? The answer is yes. David's going to be happy to send them out to this group. And then we're going to put them up on our resources webpage, which was also described during this webinar. Well, I think we're right at the 45-minute mark. We wanted to time this so that we didn't take an entire hour of your day, but hopefully you found this useful and informative. If anybody has any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to any of us, David, myself, Anna, Sylvia. And again, I want to introduce and thank our latest addition to the team, Megan, if you could kind of, yep, she's on camera right there. Megan just joined us as our new membership manager. So if you have a second, feel free to welcome Megan either via email or give her a call to say hi. With that, I would like to thank everybody and turn back the rest of the days back to you.